It's time to start rallying around America's young conservatives and explore what it means to be a young Republican in the 21st century. In a world where it seems like everyone under 30 must be a liberal, these are the stories you haven't heard before from the voices of America's young conservatives. So let's find out what it truly means to be raised right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Raised Right podcast. This is the first episode of 2022. We have a whole new year ahead of us. I'm super excited. Got a lot of big goals, not only for this podcast, but for my personal life. Got a few New Year's resolutions. I'd love to hear about your guys's as well. I think they can be cliche, but they're also a really good way of keeping us on track with our higher calling, with our purpose, with what we are destined to do and to become. So again, I'm really excited for where this podcast can go and grow in the next year. And I think this first episode really kicks us off on the right page of starting, from a high ground and talking about things that are just very still prevalent in today's society. The guest I have on this week is a young lady by the name of KellyAnna Brooking, who is only 13 years old, okay? When I was 13, I barely knew what a Republican was. Well, not really. I was still the child sitting at the dinner table just listening to my family talk politics, but was not nearly brave enough to be engaged yet myself. And KellyAnna is just kicking butt right and left, national news interviews. I mean, she's really just made a name for herself for being an extremely young conservative, right? She's 13, and just calling out the crazy nonsense that's coming from the left. And so I invited her on not only to share her story as an individual and her personal story, but her recent experience of getting kicked out of her school in Washington for not wearing a mask. So she's 13. A lot of her peers, put on the mask just to comply, and she and one of her friends said, "No, we're not doing it. We're sick of it." And so talking to her about that was just really eye-opening about what is still being pushed on kids in this country, and it's an important discussion, I think, to have. So without further ado, let's welcome on KellyAnna Brooking.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about the most recent event that happened to you, which is really going to be the focus of this particular episode, which was your school kicked you out basically for refusing to wear a mask. So we'll go into everything that led up to that and what's happened since, but just give us a rundown of what happened when they kicked you out.
Oh my gosh. So basically, I've been wearing the mask for so long. I never really felt comfortable doing it because I just don't believe that we should be forced to wear the mask. So I've been doing it for so long, and I've been complying, and it never sits right with me. So I wear it below my nose. Teachers don't like that, even though that was my compromise. So basically, my friends and I, we were just we can't keep doing this, because the more that we comply, the more that they're going to take, and the more that they're going to think it's okay to do this. So we were let's just not wear it at all. Let's just take it off. So we did that. We went into class, and she made eye contact with us in the beginning, but she wouldn't tell us to leave. So I thought that was really suspicious. But then I raised my hand to answer a question for our lesson that we were learning about. And she was like, "KellyAnna, put a mask on." And I was like, "Oh, no, thank you." And then she was like, "Okay, then you and your friend need to leave and go to the office." And then I was like, "Okay." So we went to the office. And then basically, long story short, our thing was that we can comply or we have to leave school. And I was like, "Okay, then I'll leave school."
So they kicked both you and your friend out then?
Yeah. Well, before they kicked us out, we had to go to this ISS room, this room isolated from everybody. And I was like, "This is segregation." And then everybody was like, "No, segregation is based off of race." And "No, this is still segregation. It's discriminating against certain people for doing something different."
What was the point of that room? Just to say, "Hey, they're not wearing a mask. Let's put them in a different room."
I think that they were trying to punish us. That way we would be like, "Okay, fine, we'll wear the mask so we can go back to class with everybody else." But that's not how that works.
Mm-hmm. Do you think if it wouldn't have been that particular teacher, it would have happened later in the day anyway?
Yeah, I don't think I would have had one single teacher that wouldn't have said something. All of my teachers think that way. And I know it's their job to enforce it, but really their job is to teach us. If I wanted medical advice, I would go to a doctor or talk to somebody. I don't need my history teacher telling me to put a mask on.
Right, exactly. You're right. That's not their job. That's not why they're there to teach you. So you live on the West Coast where it's super liberal. You're in Washington.
Yeah.
what is it like, all these months later, still having to wear a mask around?
I think it's not even about science anymore because I know in the beginning of COVID, everybody was more in a mindset of like, okay, this makes sense. We'll wear the mask so we can go to the grocery store. Like, this makes sense. If there's this new virus that's going to kill everybody, why wouldn't we wear the mask? And then I was like, my family and I were like, okay, we'll do that in the beginning of COVID because we didn't really know what was really happening from the government at that time. And now still having to wear the masks so many, like 14 days, get vaccinated, stop the spread, all of that stuff. It really is like more about power. I think that it's the school leaders and our governor Inslee. They're enforcing it. They're enforcing it so they can have power instead of really caring about our lives. Because if the school really cared about our lives, about my family, how about kicking us out? That's going to affect us in so many ways, like mentally and financially. They don't really care about that. And if they really cared, they would let me be in the school building. But instead, they're kicking me out for not wearing a mask because they're supposed to raise critical thinkers. They're supposed to create that culture of critical thinkers and people who think outside of the box. But instead, they're creating a culture of these people who don't even question anything. If I look around at school and I see everybody wearing a mask without questioning it, that's weird and crazy. And it doesn't hit teachers that way. And that's really concerning to me. I think it's really a power thing. They're power hungry people. And they think that because they can force all of these kids to wear masks, that's like a win for them. And I think it's really weird that we're all doing it without questioning anything. So I think that more people need to stand up against it because if we all stand up against it, they're going to stop enforcing it.
Right. And from the discussions you've had with your peers, do you think the majority of them wear the mask because they actually believe in it, believe it's a good thing, or they just don't want to cause waves, so they just comply and put it on and don't say anything?
I think more so the second option. And it's like a mix because I feel like the news of like TikTok and things like that is telling you to wear a mask because it's going to save lives. Like, wear a mask, save lives. Like, no, that's not how that works. But I feel like mostly people are getting that information from their parents and their TikTok news sources. So they're really believing it. And I also think that they don't want to cause any trouble because I know that when I was arguing with the principal in front of the whole class, there is some students that have conservative beliefs in that classroom because like when the teacher left, they're like, oh my gosh, like you're so brave, I would never be able to do that. And then I see like later they post on their story like, don't comply. Like, how can you say that and then not actually stand up for it when you have that moment?
Right. Yeah. And that's what I ran into a lot too, is fellow conservatives
Yeah,
that were like, yeah, we believe what you believe and we're on your side, but we're not going to say anything. We're not going to stand up. We're not
yeah,
going to fight back with you. And it's mind boggling that people can't act in the same way that they believe. Like,
I
I don't
agree.
know how we got there.
Yeah, and I was in that space when I was at school because I like don't wear a mask anywhere I go. Like when I'm at the grocery store, or even I try to not do it at the airport. Like I just like really like don't wear a mask. But school is the one place for me where like they forced me to. Like I had to wear the mask. And then I was in this thing where I'd be like giving speeches saying do not comply. But yeah, I felt like a hypocrite because I was complying at school. And then it really hit me like I cannot morally wear the mask anymore. So that's what made me stop doing it.
Right. And I think more people need to align their beliefs with their actions like you've
Yeah.
done. And there are going to be consequences, unfortunately, but that's kind of the fight that we're up against now. So
Yeah,
they
exactly.
kick you out of school. This happened on Wednesday, correct?
Yes.
So it's only been 2 days for you being quote unquote remote. Did they give
Yeah.
you an option to come back, or are they just saying you're done? Like, we've given you enough chances?
Yeah, well, their compromise was we're not kicking you out of school, but if you want to come back, you have to wear the mask. So it's like that is kicking me out of school. So like they're not giving me that option to be at school like certain hours. And I don't know if you know who Melanie Gabriel is, but she's a girl around my age. She's a ninth grader in Washington State too. And she had to carry around papers with her that would she'd have to show certain teachers to not wear a mask, but she'd go in the hallways at different times. And if the school ever made me do that compromise, I would not do it. I'm not going to carry around freedom papers to make me not wear a mask. I'm not going to comply to that either. So I feel like if there was to be a compromise, it'd be something super extreme and crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard this story before. Show me your papers. Like, hello, why is that
Yeah.
sitting well with people? This is a terrible, terrible way to get people to comply,
Yes.
and compliance on that level is just disastrous, as we've seen. So
Yes.
what's your, plan of action now? What are you going to do?
I'm still trying to figure it out. My family and I are in a really tough spot right now because everybody is just telling me, even some conservatives are just telling me, like, just wear the mask. Like, you're going to miss out on so many social things and so many important things at school. And I'm like, yeah, I know, my friends are there, sports, things like that. But even sports, I have to get tested 3 times a week, regardless of my vaccination status. So I can't even do that anymore either. So my family's in a really tough spot right now. Like, are we going to move? Are we going to do homeschool? Like, I don't really know. It's so confusing. All I know is that I'm not going to go back to school and comply and wear the mask.
Good. Truly, you're one in a
Yeah.
million students out there that, are brave enough to stand that strong, because I think the first sign of difficulty, people kind of cave and they run away from
Yeah.
it. So talk to us a little bit about how you were raised right and came up with these morals and beliefs and values, and how you're able to stick through it.
Yeah, well, my dad and my stepmom are always there for me, and my grandma too. I was always raised in sort of like a mixed political, like my household and my house is conservative, but I always have like all across the spectrum, different religions, different political views and things like that. And my family, regardless of it being conservative or not, has always just told me to stand up for what I think the truth is and to stand up for what I believe in, regardless if that's political or not. And for me, this whole not complying isn't necessarily just a Republican conservative thing. It's just morally like, it's not even just about the mask anymore. Like, yes, it's annoying. I can't breathe. It's annoying. It's itchy, whatever. It's not even just about the mask anymore. It's about the message behind the mask. The government thinking that they can mask us all up and take away our unique features and just having us all look the same. And I think that's the government's plan to see how everybody will do it without questioning it. And my family has always told me to not do that, to just like question everything. Really, I know it's a big thing right now. Question everything, question the science. So that's a really important thing to me.
Yeah, I like that. And questioning everything is how we raise critical thinkers, right? You have
Yeah,
to
exactly.
think outside the box. You have to question things. You can't just be a robot. And you're absolutely right. It just feels like a push for control, because if it's not the mask, then it's the vaccine mandates. We have
Yeah.
kids in colleges who can't even attend in-person class without having a vaccination card on record. And if it's not that, it's something else. It just continues and continues. And I mean, it's really interesting to see how far people will let themselves be pushed into this just
Yep.
like position of I'll go with anything and everything.
Yeah, I really agree. And it's really concerning that grown adults aren't even questioning it. And I'm 13 and I'm already questioning it. And I know you're
Right.
young too and you're questioning it. And it's like, it's really weird to me that nobody is questioning it. That's creepy. It's weird. And it's really, really concerning to me as Gen Z. I wish that the older generations would fight for it too, because then maybe it wouldn't be such a hard fight for my generation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of adults, I mean, and even our age, it comes into this category of red versus blue, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
a Democrat, you're just going to follow Fauci and follow everything that the officials say. And if you're red,
Yeah.
then you're known as not listening and challenging everything. And there's people on both sides that are just like, what is happening in our country? What is going
Yeah.
on? This is not the United States of America. They can't push us to do these crazy things.
I agree.
So what, KellyAnna, you've got so much opportunity ahead of you and so much potential to keep being
Thank
just a
you.
voice for extremely young conservatives. I mean, I wasn't even engaged nearly at the level that you are at your age. So thank you, first of all.
Thank
And,
you.
just want to know, like, what are your goals? What are your ambitions to be a voice for young conservatives?
Yes. Well, my goal is to really encourage this new generation of conservatives to actually do something. And this sounds really weird, but I'll explain why. So I see all of these conservatives, like these TikTok conservatives. That's all they do. They make TikToks and they live in a red state and they don't do anything. Like they'll take a picture, like these conservative girls will take pictures in bikinis and it won't even be anything about politics. And then the caption is like, Big Gov sucks. Like, okay, like conservative influencer or whatever.
Right.
I really encourage these conservatives, especially conservative girls, to actually do something. Like give a speech, don't wear the mask, like do something instead of just calling yourself this big conservative influencer and then don't actually do anything. And also, another thing that's really important to me is encouraging people to have conversations on both sides, because I feel like my generation really lacks that, because instead of actually having a conversation of like, okay, you're a liberal, so you think murdering babies is okay, which is usually the case. They do usually support abortion, but not every liberal. And another thing is like conservatives, like, okay, you support Trump, you're racist. Instead of jumping to those conclusions, have a conversation and meet in the middle. Because I see why people wouldn't want to do that, because I've heard people say like, oh yeah, Republicans and Democrats, they have the same goal, they just have a different way of going about it. I don't agree with that anymore. There's completely different goals. They think socialism is okay. We don't. There's completely different ways of making America a better place. So I feel like people just need to have conversations because you'll really learn so much instead of just being judgmental.
I love both of those things. I mean, you call out a really prevalent thing that I think isn't called out enough, and that's just this idea of clout chasing
Yeah.
and going it for the likes and not ever really having to sacrifice or lose anything
Yeah.
to be in this fight. And I know everybody wants that love and the attention and to feel validated, and that is, it's part of it, but it's not everything. You have to lose something. You have to be really engaged, I think, to be, a so-called freedom fighter. Otherwise,
Yeah, I agree.
it's for nothing. And I love that. I really do. And I think talking to other people about their beliefs, whether they're left, right, or center, is how we get progress. I think a lot of people don't want to see both sides talk to each other. They don't want to see that meeting in the middle. They don't want there to be compromise or happiness. And that's never what it's been. There's always been political parties in this country, and somehow we've always figured out how to put the country first. So I don't know why that's become so hard all of a sudden, but I'm
I
really
agree.
hoping that those conversations are had. And my goal for this podcast is to maybe get people on here that weren't raised right and believe something completely different than I do, but maybe still consider themselves a conservative. And
Yeah.
there's so many branches out there. So
Yeah, I agree. I think podcasts are a really good way to hear other people's opinions because on my show, A Few Words podcast, but I've tried having liberal people come on and they won't do it. So, and then they're posting like, oh, I just wish a conservative would actually talk to me. I'm trying, but they won't do it. So I feel like
right.
that's really annoying.
Yeah, I think it's intimidating to them because you invite them into your realm and your following, which is mostly conservative based. I mean, that's a problem that I ran into, is like, I don't want to go on a show with people that are just going to like harass me the rest of
I get that.
But I mean, that's how you get your voice out there, right? That's the cost that you give for pushing for truth. So
exactly.
we believe in something, stand for it.
Yeah.
So is there anything else, that you wanted to get out to people, that you wanted to talk about that I hadn't asked yet or brought up?
Yeah, so something I do want to talk about is my faith a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's really important to me. I know you didn't ask, but I just try to talk about this whenever I can.
Yeah.
Okay, so my faith is really important to me, and a lot of people think that I was raised in like a super Christian conservative household and like I'm a bigot and my family's bigots and things like that. Like no. So when I became a conservative like about 2 years ago now, that's when I also became a Christian too, because I was making cookies with my grandma one day and I was telling her about all of this hate that I get on social media for talking about my political views. And then she told me the story about how Jesus was hated first. So if the world hates you, then you're doing something right, because then you're trying to be like Jesus. And that really just like, I was like, wow, that is actually so important. There's something so much bigger than myself. So if I stand up for the truth and freedom, then I will also stand up for my faith too. So that really motivated me to start doing that. And then I started going to church and started reading my Bible and started having conversations with people about my faith. And then in the summer, I got baptized, and that was one of the most important things to me ever. And I feel like people always look at me and they're like, oh my gosh, you're such this racist Trump supporter and you don't even have anything important to you. Like, most importantly, before my politics, my faith and my family comes first. So I just wish that people would actually have those conversations with me about my important moral beliefs instead of just jumping to conclusions about how I'm homophobic and racist and things like that. So I just wanted to share that. I feel like these new conservatives, before you jump onto the Trump train, maybe try to find something bigger than yourself. Like, try to find your faith, even if you don't have to be this like Christian influencer. I know that there's these like so steadfast in their faith, like really judgmental Christian influencers. But yeah, that would just be my biggest piece of advice. Find faith.
I love that. I really do. I mean, we both are wearing our cross necklaces,
Yeah.
sisters in faith. And I love that, but it's so true. It's like, if you're not leaning on something and not feeling connected to something bigger than yourself, you feel lost, and I think, I really believe that everybody has a purpose on this earth. Like, we're not just here to exist. We have a calling, we have a leading. And sometimes God just picks you up and puts you in a place that you didn't expect to be or to go. And you just kind of have to ride that wave. But it's so calming, and you probably feel the same way.
Yeah.
Just be connected to something bigger than what you feel you're going through on your own.
Yeah, I agree. And like, there's all these crazy things going on in the world right now with like politics and so divided. But like, as a Christian, it's so like it's so peaceful, yeah, to know that like God wins in the end. Like it doesn't even matter really. God wins in the end. So it feels like no matter who's president, Jesus is still king. And I feel like that's a really important reminder as everybody's getting frustrated. And I feel like these Republicans and conservatives who don't have that Christian background, it's more stressful for them because they don't really have that calming feeling of knowing that God will win. So I feel like for like you and I know that there's a bunch of other Christian conservatives, but you and I, like, we know that God wins in the end. So I feel like that's what's really important.
Yeah, and there's a great book by Ben Shapiro called The Right Side to History, where he talks about how America was very much founded on Judeo-Christian principles.
Yeah.
And that's why if you remove those from our country, we're destined to fail. And people that have abandoned those beliefs and those values, I mean, that's where we get these crazy leftists where nothing matters and there's no moral compass because they've completely taken God out of our Constitution, out of our livelihood. And we can't let that happen. You know, you're right. This battle is bigger than just red versus blue. It's a battle of good versus evil. But when you fight on the side of right, you're destined to prevail. So you just got to keep your head up and keep trekking, keep in it.
Yep, I agree.
So, well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's super important. And I had a politician tell me once, like, when you introduce yourself, I don't want to know what your title is. I don't want to know what your involvement in politics. I want to know about your family. I want to know about your faith. I want to know about what you do outside of work. And I mean, that's pretty much just what you said too. Your faith and your family comes first. And that's
exactly.
Central. So, all right, KellyAnna, well, thank you so much for coming on and kind of talking a little bit about both yourself and your story with being kicked out of school. I hope God presents a resolution in a pretty clear way. I think he will. I know he will.
Yeah.
And whether you end up moving to a good old state, maybe Arizona, or
I know, right? I
keep red here. So yeah, I hope and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. God bless you.
If you're a conservative ready to stand firm in their beliefs and fight for freedom, you're not going to want to miss a single episode of the Raised Right podcast. You can subscribe on any of your favorite podcast apps so you're up to date on what's going on in the political world. Be sure to like, follow, and share our content on an Instagram page at Raised Right Podcast and Facebook and Twitter at Raised Right Pod. This is what it means to be raised right.